All your secrets acted out on screen. Ouch. Second chance romance with a superhero? Sure. A mother's journey? Real life disasters? I'm in. Rugby? Fragile love? Part number 2? Oh yes. I spent a week reading some of my favourite booktubers' beloved books. Some of the books made me cry, and others, not so much. So today we're going to find out which booktuber I think has the best taste in books. Well, apart from me, of course. So in this video, I choose one book on behalf of each booktuber that I've seen them either rave about the book about or about the author. We have some second chance romance, some secrets revealed, and some seriously shocking plot twists. And I'll let you know the pros and cons of each book, the ranking of each book, and finally, who I think has the best taste in books. So the first booktuber was Pham, and the first book was Between Us by Mhairi McFarlane. I was already a fan of Mhairi McFarlane's, so this was just a great excuse to read another one of her books. Pham is a huge fan of Mhairi's books, and that's a great start. Roisin and boyfriend Joe go on a weekend away with some friends, and whilst they're there, they decide to watch the premiere of Joe's brand new TV series on which he's a writer. But slowly, Roisin begins to realise that the storylines are eerily similar to some secrets in her own life that she's only told Joe. So what are some of my favourite parts of the book? First of all, there's a cat in the book called Meatball. Need I say more? There is some serious gaslighting in this book, and though it's obviously a horrible thing to do or to have done to yourself, I think it's really beneficial to be spoken about in books or, the media. How people try and change the narrative of past events and try and make you doubt yourself. It's a really hard topic, but I really think it's important to be spoken about. There is also a minor subplot of romance as well. But what were some of my least favourite parts of the book? I think unfortunately it just took a bit too long to get to the interesting part of the main plot line, which obviously is the most interesting part of the story. There were a lot of other kind of subplots with their friends and stuff, and I kind of feel like if there was less of that and more of the main plot line, the book would have been a lot better. In regards to the other subplots, some of them were kind of long and drawn out, and it just didn't need to be that way, I think. Here are some of my favourite quotes from Between Us. Roisin and Ryan had never been allowed pets, notionally because a public house was an inhospitable environment. They will only up and die and upset you, Lorraine had said. Everything dies, said an adolescent Roisin. The price of love is grief. Everything was a slight if you were determined to find one. I'm going to do the summaries and how I would rank the books a little bit later on in the video. But before we move on, just make sure you've got all the nods to the book. So booktuber number 2 was Sara Carrolli, and apparently she loves this book so much she reads it every year. So I had high hopes for this one. Ghosted by J.M. Darhower. Kennedy is a single mum to a young daughter. She works in a grocery store and life can be pretty monotonous at times. However, one day her past comes back to haunt her because staring back at her from the grocery store magazines is a face that she used to know. Jonathan is now the latest heartthrob in a superhero franchise, and he's back in town. And he's back in town for a reason. So what were some of my favourite parts of the book? I am a big fan of books where there's a potential romance between a celebrity and a non-celebrity. I always think the dynamics are pretty tricky, and that's why it's so intriguing to read. I was also a fan of the first love being told in flashbacks of Kennedy and Jonathan. But what were some of the parts I wasn't as keen on in the book? There are some issues mentioned in the book that are quite hard to read about, and they're meant to be. So if you feel like you need to check any warnings, please do so. There is also some actions within the book that I would probably find pretty unforgivable to me, and it's also swept under the carpet a bit too easily for me as well. Here are some of my favourite quotes from Ghosted. I feel like an obsessed, lovesick fangirl, convinced the heartthrob was supposed to be mine, but he wasn't. I always thought the first story was finished, the original one, and maybe it is. Maybe this is just an epilogue, or maybe it's a sequel. I wasn't accusing you of cheating. I just wanted to know how long it took you to move on. Oh, well, that's an easy one, he says. It hasn't happened. Wow, I can't believe we're on the third book already. The third booktuber I chose was Delaney Smith, and I have noticed that she's a big fan of Kristin Hannah books. So for the book I've chosen for Delaney, I have chosen The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah. Elsa Martinelli is a married mum of two. She loves being part of a family and working on their farm. However, when their livelihood is threatened by a drought, she needs to decide whether they stay in their home no matter what, or take the ultimate risk and go in search of a better life elsewhere. So, what were some of my favourite parts of the book? I've been really getting into historical fiction recently. Reading about real life past events is always really interesting to me, especially when it's told well. You really do root for Elsa and her family. You want them to succeed. The storytelling in this book is brilliant. The writing and the pacing are excellent too. With the topic it's about, it could have been the complete opposite, so I feel like the author's done such an excellent job in making it really intriguing. But what were some of the parts I wasn't so keen on? Listen, I'm not going to lie, this isn't the happiest book I've ever read. It's actually pretty hard to read at points because it is told so well. You actually feel how tough it is for the characters in the book. It's especially hard knowing that the book is based on real life events and that people had lived through it. I honestly didn't know much about the events in the book, but after I'd finished it, I was so touched by the book, I did look it up afterwards. Here are some of my favourite quotes from The Four Winds. A warrior believes in an end she can't see and fights for it. A warrior never gives up. A warrior fights for those weaker than herself. It sounds like motherhood to me. It wasn't the fear that mattered in life. It was the choices made when you were afraid. You were brave because of your fear, not in spite of it. Don't worry about dying, Elsa. Worry about not living. Be brave. So now on to the final booktuber, and therefore the final book. Out of all the booktubers I've seen, Destiny Sidwell is the biggest fan of the Boys of Tommen series by Chloe Walsh. Therefore, that's a great excuse to read book number 2, Keeping 13. Keeping 13 is an immediate follow-on to Binding 13. So if you haven't read up to this point, just beware. Some of the natural plot lines might be spoilers for you. Johnny and Shannon are basically seeing each other now, and Johnny is very protective of Shannon, especially with some of the issues she's got in her life. But Johnny is struggling too with an injury, and he's not sure where he'll stand in regards to rugby if something doesn't change soon. So what were some of my favourite parts of the book? Johnny and Shannon are a couple you can really root for. They're really good for each other. There is some light relief in some of the darker times, mainly in the form of Gibbsy, which is one of Johnny's friends, and I know he's really popular with readers. I saw a much more mature side to Johnny in this book, and his character really grew on me. Everyone could use a Johnny Kavanagh in their life. But what were some of the parts of the book I wasn't as keen on? Listen, the book starts heavy, and honestly, it just gets heavier. Chloe Walsh is not afraid to go there. I cried in parts, and I definitely would recommend you check out the trigger warnings if you feel like you need to. As the same in the previous book, there are some parts that I found a little bit silly and a little bit OTT. Here are some of my favourite quotes from Keeping 13. You show up and all the bad just goes away for a little while. I'm not in your corner, Shannon, Johnny replied in a gruff tone. I'm standing right beside you. Contract or not, I'm entirely yours. So that's all the books that I've read for this video. So now's the time to summarise the books and rank them in the order of which booktuber I think has the best taste. So for the book I would put in 4th place, I would put Between Us by Mhairi McFarlane, which was my pick for Hayley Pham. Initially, I thought this book was a pretty safe shout because I'm a big fan of Mhairi McFarlane's books anyway. However, pretty soon into the book, I did realise it wasn't going to be a favourite of mine. I really love the premise of the book, which is basically Roisin's boyfriend has written her secrets into his new TV show. But I found it just took too long to get to kind of anything interesting of the main plot. There's a lot of other minor subplots that a lot of time was spent on, and I just feel like if the time was spent more on the main plot line, it would have been a much more interesting book. I rated the book 2.75 stars, and I'm really sad to say this is actually probably my least favourite book of Mhairi's that I've read so far. The book I would put in 3rd place was my pick for Sara Carrolli, which was Ghosted by J.M. Darhower. Again, I really love the idea for the book, which is basically a second chance romance where one of the couple has gone on to be a celebrity. I always think that's a really interesting premise. My major problem with this book is the actions that one of the characters does. I would find completely unforgivable, so it's really hard to root for a couple in those circumstances. Plus, it was also one of those books I wasn't actually that fussed to keep picking up and read either. I rated the book 3.5 stars, and I did enjoy reading the book, but not as much as Sarah does. I wouldn't be interested in reading it again. My choice for Destiny Sidwell is the book I would put in 2nd place, and that is Keeping 13 by Chloe Walsh. If you saw my video where I actually started the series, so Binding 13, you'll know that until about the halfway point, I wasn't that interested in the book. However, after that, I couldn't put it down. I was such a fan of Johnny and Shannon in this book, but I have to say, the main plot line is what made this book for me. I could see it coming, but I was gripped. I was absolutely gripped. I rated the book 4.5 stars, and I'm sad to say that the next book doesn't focus on Johnny and Shannon. It changes focus to other characters, but I'm definitely still interested in where the series goes from here. So that means in 1st place is my pick for Delaney Smith, which was The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah. I'll say again, recently I've been getting into historical fiction more, and this book is one of the reasons why. Again, I can't say this is the happiest book I've ever read, but it does have hope and a really strong woman just wanting the best for her family, and I really like that in a book. I really can't say as much as I'd like to about the book without spoiling it for you, but the fact it's set in a major natural disaster is an indication of what to expect. I rated the book 4.5 stars, and yes, it is the same mark that I gave to Keeping 13, but I just felt The Four Winds really edged it for me. I was really invested in the book. So there we have it. That's all the books that I chose for this video. And obviously, I think all the booktubers that I watch have great taste, otherwise I wouldn't watch them. But in this case, I have to agree with Delaney Smith. My top pick is definitely The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah. Now, before we go, let's just go through the nods for each individual book, but first for the universal theme of Booktuber book picks. So the first thing was books, obviously, and then the next thing was a microphone, just to indicate YouTube. The nods for Between Us are the writing stuff for Joe's job as a TV writer, so that's the pencil and the notebook. The cup of coffee for the saying Cup of Joe, for his name. Yeah, okay, that one's a bit of a stretch. The cat, as there is a cat called Meatball in the story. Plus the drinks, as there is a pub in the story. Ghosted had these nods. The ghost for, well, the title of the book. The superhero figure for the main male character's job. The comic book, as that is where the superhero originated from. The shopping bag, as Kennedy's job is in a grocery store. And the heart for the second chance romance. The nods for The Four Winds were the sun for the weather element in the book, the crops for the farming aspect, the car, as there is some travel in the book, and the shopping bag, as there is a grocery store in the plotline. The nods for Keeping 13 were the rugby ball, as Johnny plays rugby, the heart for the romance, the car, as Johnny picks Shannon up a lot, and the phone for obvious reasons, they communicate via one and is in the plotline. I really hope you've liked the video, and if you have, please do consider liking and subscribing. It really does help out the channel a lot. If you fancy sticking around, YouTube thinks you might like this video here.